everyone, another episode of Piping Talks. And today we have a pipe major, and I feel like I haven't talked to a pipe major in a long time. So it would be I'm very excited. It'd be very nice to talk about what is the role of a pipe major, especially of a Grade One band. Ton of topics around leading a core, leading a band, creating a medley, and kind of like dive deeper into those sort of tune selection and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, we have Stewart McKenzie all the way from New Zealand. He's the pipe major of Manawatu pipe band. It's not the full name, but I'm sure we'll be able to explain the whole name to everyone. But yeah, top band in Grade One pipe major. So very excited about this one. But yeah, Stuart, how are you doing?
Good, thanks, Claren. Yeah, good to be on the show.
Yeah, of course. So we were just chatting, and you were saying that you had a solid practice last night in Wellington. Is this where the band is based?
Well, yeah, so we're Manawatu Scottish. We're based primarily out of the lower North Island of New Zealand. So the band has always been based in a place called Palmerston North, which is the middle of the Manawatu province. It's the main town, but we have evolved into more of a lower North Island band. So there's a lot of us in Wellington. So we had a good practice in Wellington last night. It's very cold and damp here at the moment. So we're right in the middle of deepest, darkest winter. So in terms of pipes, there's plenty of moisture around, and so we were getting a bit frustrated last night with the moisture, but it was good. It was a good session, and yeah, not long to go now until we get on the plane to Scotland.
Right, that's right. Yeah. So before we dive into the band, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Is it where you're from originally, like North Ireland, or are you from another part of New Zealand?
Yeah, so I grew up in Palmerston North, which is it's a provincial city of about 100,000 people. Yeah, very much one of the um, provinces of New Zealand, mainly agricultural. It's a big Palmerston North is a big university town. I went to school, grew up there. Went to university there as well. I studied city planning, which is what I've been doing as a career since I left university. Um, and yes, I'm a palmy boy, as they say in New Zealand. And but I've been essentially based out of Wellington for most of the last 25 odd years, except for about 7 years in the UK, where I lived in Scotland and London.
All right, all right. I'm excited to talk about that. I did hear from friends that we have in common that you lived in London, so I'm excited to talk about it as well. And so I've been to Palmerston North actually for a competition. There is a competition that happens every year. Isn't it the first major, if I can say, of New
Mm.
Zealand? Right, it's the first competition of New Zealand in New Zealand during the
Yeah,
season. Is that right?
yeah, that's right. It's called Square Day. It's called that because
Square Day.
it's in the square in the middle of Palmerston North, which is quite a picturesque public location. And yeah, it's a great contest. And yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
you're
I
right.
liked it.
It is. Yeah, it is our first major of the season. It's always in December, which is the start of the Kiwi summer. And yeah, it's up there with the New Zealand Nationals in terms of its importance. And yeah, we're very proud of it. It's been part of the broader Manawatu Scottish Society, which the band is affiliated to, have been the organisers. And yeah, it's always a great day.
Yeah, I had a good time. I went there with a band that I was playing with in Australia, so it meant that it was quite important because we flew from Australia to compete. And I know there are other bands from Australia that traveled for that competition, so that's great. You're now the manager of the band. Manawatu, was the band created when you joined? Was it something that was already there, or did you help start the band? I actually, I must say, usually when I have someone and I have a conversation, I know a little bit about their background, but for you, it's a surprise. I'm excited to dive into that. Is it something that the band was already there, or are you part of creating the band?
The band actually has a long, proud history. Actually, we were formed in 1925, so we're actually coming up for a pretty exciting centennial, 100 years in 2025. So Yeah, very long, proud history as the Manawatu Pipe Band, then Manawatu Scottish Society, and for about the last 20, 30 years, we've just been Manawatu Scottish. So, yeah, the band was very much established when I took over. I've been a member of Manawatu Scottish since 1986. So from the age of 10, I've been a member of the band. I'm now 48. So it's a pretty large chunk of my life that I've been playing in Manawatu Scottish. So it's been a huge part of my life. I took over as pipe major in 1999. Um, and so I've been pipe major for 24 odd years. Quite scary actually. I've been pipe major longer than quite a few of our younger members have been alive. I still don't feel that old, Claren. So, so yeah, it's been a huge part of my life. It's been yeah,
How
lots
did
of
you join
life lessons.
the band in the first place? Like, was it something that your family was part of the association, or you just heard the pipes and you wanted to get into it?
Oh no, I was brainwashed from a very young age, and thankfully so. My father was quite a driving force of the band. He was a drummer. He was actually a good musician in his own right. He played guitar and other things as well. But he actually played pipes as well, not to a high standard. But he was a driving force behind the education um, movement in the band, and he taught loads and loads of young drummers. And so he taught my brother, who was actually leading drummer of the band while I was pipe major in my early years as well. But I was taught by a guy called Dennis Pearce as well. So Dennis was sort of driving the young piping education. My father was doing the same for drumming. So I was part of a big influx in the mid '80s. And I think a lot of the success of the Manawatu Scottish band over the last 2 or 3 decades has been down to that really strong teaching program which both Dennis and my father Jock put in place. And so yeah, that's how I became a member. Both my uncles played in the band as well at different times. I had cousins that played in the band,
Wow, the whole
and then
family.
yeah, and the number two band that is so like a lot of bigger band organisations, we have a grade one band, essentially a juvenile band, which is now more of a mixed young people and adults as well that plays in grade three. Um, so yeah, there was a big influx. It was a real family affair, if you like, in terms of a lot of other families were involved as well, and yeah, so that's kind of how it all started.
Huh. Is it still do you feel like right now, is it still very much a family affair? You have a lot of people or band members that have brothers or sisters or cousins or uncle that play in the band, or not so much?
Yeah, I think not so much now. We have a really eclectic cosmopolitan mix. It's really cool of people. But it's funny, I reflect on, every band has its own particular culture and own style. And I know people coming into the band from outside reflect on the fact that it still has quite a strong family culture. It's hard to, culture's a hard thing to define, but there is a family feel to the band. And I kind of put a lot of it down to the fact that our forefathers were school teachers, and there were um, a lot of families, and it was based on a lot of young kids coming in at the same time. And I think we've kept a lot of those sort of values, if you like, that they instilled of a family feel. It's hard to put your finger on, but quite a few people have said that coming into the band.
That's great. I mean, it must be a pride moment for you, or for the early people that were that started the band, to know that even almost 100 years, which is crazy. You hear a band that are celebrating 50, and you guys are about to celebrate 100. So it's a massive
Mm.
achievement, but it must be, yeah, a proud moment to just feel like there's still this program, I would say, like all the bands have, not that many actually around the world, but that sort of teaching program that helps to feed the system through to grade one. That's great to hear. And then what was the I'm always curious to hear from people that are now at a leading position in the band, where before, I imagine when you joined, you were 10, you learned the pipes, and at what point were you, brought up to be pipe major of the band? Were you first a pipe surgeon that then into a pipe major, or was it straight up to pipe major role? What was that transition? Is it something you wanted, or it just happened and you took it forward?
Yeah, good question. So for many years, when I first came into the band, in the grade one band, it was led by a gentleman by the name of Dennis Pierce, who I still really look back on as a really key figure in my piping journey. He stood down from pipe major in the mid 90s, and a guy who you'll know his name, a guy called Greg Wilson, who's one of our most famous solo pipers, who's won both the Inverness and Open gold medals and lots of other big prizes in Scotland. Now, I was very fortunate, and the band was very fortunate that he was stationed in an army base. He was an officer in the army at that time, just outside of Palmerston North. So that created an association. So I had personal lessons from him for years, and I still very much look at Greg as a piping mentor. And he also got involved in the band, and he took over as pipe major for quite a short period of time, so about 2 or 3 years. But it was really a really formative time for the band. He took the band from a good, keen, enthusiastic band with potential right up to a contender in New Zealand Grade One. Not Scottish Grade One, but certainly a contender in the New Zealand Grade One scene. And then I was his pipe sergeant, so I was quite young at the time, but I was the pipe sergeant of the band. He then moved to Scotland for piping. He had a role with the National Piping Centre at that time in the late 90s. And so, yeah, he more or less handed the reins over to me. It was made official. So I was just finishing university at the time. And it was like, oh my God, I'm going to be pipe major. And it was more kind of, I think back now, it was kind of a little bit of excitement, quite a big dollop of fear, quite a big dollop of mystery. I really didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I knew deep down that I wanted to do it. I
Oh,
thought,
you
well,
felt
here's an
like you were.
opportunity.
That's like, yeah, that's what you wanted to do. Like you felt like it was going to come at some point.
Well, it was an opportunity that I thought was too good to turn down. And I had the support of my family, I had the support of the other key figures in the band. And yeah, so 1998, I took over. I was 23 at the time, 22, 23,
Wow.
something like that. And I was formalized as pipe major in early 1999. So
Was the band
the last millennium, yeah.
was the band competing in Scotland at the time, or was it purely in New Zealand? Or was the band doing trips to Scotland?
Yeah, so we did our first trip in '97, and I remember it fondly. It was like many bands, especially back then. There was a lot more mystery to it, Glenn. We there wasn't the internet, there wasn't social media. You just all you really had were world's CDs, and so it was all a
Right.
learning experience. And I'll never forget. We turned up. Greg Wilson, the pipe major in 1997. Um, I was pipe sergeant at the time. Our first trip to Scotland, we'd entered in grade two. So he was convinced that we weren't good enough for Scottish grade one. And he was right. We weren't going to be competitive at the top end of grade one or even the middle. But we turned up and we got to North Berwick
Hmm.
contest. And we found out on the day after, 18 months of preparation, that no, you have to play in grade one. So we were upgraded on the spot by the RSPBA. So we were put into grade one, and we didn't actually even make the world's program. We were sort of -1. We were first on
Oh
before
my
the
god.
rest of the bands. Yeah, I remember it well. But the band played pretty well. It was back in the days of, I think there was 25 bands or whatever it was in grade one, and I think we ended up 21st or something. So we were quite pleased with the fact we had a few bands behind us. But it was
Nice.
it was a huge learning experience. It really was. When you look at it, I know people look at trips and things as a learning experience, but that was a really formative learning experience. And so we went
Right.
again
Yeah.
in 1999 as well, which it was my first pipe major. We didn't play that well. We didn't get the sound right. I think for me as a pipe major, that was a massive learning experience. And I think from that trip, was quite a watershed moment. Following that trip, a number of older players moved on. We had an influx of younger players, and yeah, we started to build something which was fairly successful.
Do you do you think you know do you think a trip like this could I have a lot of questions but that just come up to my mind, but do you feel like a trip like this, when you go over and you're not playing necessarily well, like you mentioned, maybe you were, but you felt like it was not your best performance, it could sort of change the dynamic of a band, like an overseas band like you that travel for so far? Or do you feel like you know uh, any trip kind of create a strong foundation for the band regardless?
Yeah, yeah, all of that, I think, Darren. It can only ever be a good thing. And if you find out that you're actually not where you need to be, or if you find out, you've got issues with, certain players that simply aren't quite up to it anymore, or your sound is not competitive. It's a benchmark. Going to Scotland is a real benchmark, and I think it's just so important for overseas bands that have aspirations to get to Scotland, and which
Right.
is why the last five years has been so damn hard, because we
Yeah.
through COVID we just haven't been able to get there. So it makes this next trip, I think, equally as important as any trip we've ever done. Because it's really
Wow.
like
Okay.
getting back
I'm
into the
excited to talk
international
about
arena.
this. Yeah,
Mm,
the current state. But so that was your first 97 was your first trip
yep.
personally, or
Yeah.
only as a band? You've been there before? You had been there before?
Yeah, I'd played solos in Scotland in 1994. So I received lessons from Murray Henderson, who very proud Kiwi, but he's a naturalised Scotsman now. One of the world's great solo players, and I was so fortunate to have lessons from him. And much of what I learnt from him, and Greg Wilson, I still really carry with me. I really, that's my foundation, if you like, for piping, is what I've learnt from those guys, and others along the way, of course. But I really look at that time with Murray, '94, when I played solos in Scotland and went around the games, and had a great old time. And again, that was from a solo piping perspective. That was just a huge learning experience, and yeah, I
Right,
got
right,
some
right.
prizes. It was fun, but again, the learning experience outweighed that.
How was it? Like, I'm always curious, for the first Scotland trip, like, everyone remember, if you're not from Scotland, and you travel far, or if it's just a short flight away, did you get to the walls? How was it like just listening to top bands that you had listened to on tape or CDs or cassette, and you arrive there and it's live. It's like you're a meter away from it. Like, what was the feeling?
It's an amazing feeling, isn't it? Yeah. So look, just very briefly though, I did live in Scotland as a kid, as an 8-year-old. Because my father was a school teacher, he got a teaching exchange to Inverness. So I lived in Inverness for a year and actually learnt the chanter, um, in the Inverness schools program. Um, an Australian guy called Alistair McCaffer, actually, he was teaching at the time. But so it's funny, I had these childhood memories of listening to pipe 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 band contests. So my father took me along to whatever championships it was, and I remember being really overawed by it and thought it was amazing. And we went to a couple of games and toured around Scotland, so it wasn't unfamiliar. So going back in '94 under a piping scholarship, Scotland kind of felt vaguely familiar. I'd
Hmm.
been a school kid there for a year, um, but geez, the both the solo piping and the bands, just another whole dimension. Just to be around the bands and listen as a reasonably accomplished piper. Uh, Again, I look at that as a really key learning experience, and I think deep down motivated me that, look, I really want to do something with pipe bands going forward. Even though solo piping is really important to me, I guess my heart, my ambition, if you like, has always been aligned to doing things as a pipe band. And yeah, that's probably what that cemented as much as anything.
Yeah. Did you ever consider, you were talking about how you went to university and you have a job that isn't related to piping, but were you ever considering it, like, to be a teacher or piping teacher?
It's a good question. I have to say I've never seriously considered. doing piping, either teaching or playing. I'm not good enough from a playing perspective, but or even teaching to do it as a living. I've always really enjoyed it as a hobby, and
Hmm.
I'm always I like coming home and doing a variety of things, but I enjoy it as a hobby, coming home and having a tune, and you end up practicing at night when you're tired or whatever. But I I think for me, if I did it as a living, I'd probably lose the passion for it. And I mean, I've had a really strong career focus in city planning my whole working life, and I've really enjoyed that. That's another part of my life which I have no regrets at all. Um, yes, I would love more time for piping. You know,
Like everyone, but it's good to separate it.
yeah, exactly. But no, I made I guess a reasonably conscious decision that no, I wasn't interested in being a teacher or earning my living through piping. I made that
Right,
decision at
right,
quite
right.
an early stage.
I like to ask that because it's, at that level, especially being a pipe major of a grade one band, I mean, that's a lot of hours every week that you spend on rather preparing the band or thinking about the band. So it could very
Hmm.
much be at that point just like a full time job. Um,
Good.
Going back to the early days where you took the band over and, you went over to the Worlds, what was like, if you think back, like, what was the biggest, trip where you went over and you felt like that was the best Scotland trip? Because you guys were known. I mean, obviously, this is my view from someone that grew up in Europe and looked at bands flying over, and I was always like amazed, like at this is not a short trip. This is a massive trip for you guys, right? It's something you plan like 10, 12 months in advance, probably even more, maybe. Um, if you had one trip to Scotland with the band where you just felt like the band was going really, really well, you were proud of, the performances, but also just the camaraderie was just like everything was just great trip. One.
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. Tough one. I think we're up to number 11. I think our 11th World's trip. But
Whoa.
I think the one that really stands out for me, and it wasn't necessarily the most successful trip, but the one that stands out for me is when the band, I think, probably arrived as a bit of a force in grade one, or certainly made an impact musically, and that was 2003. So it was the first time that we had qualified for the final. Obviously, the qualifier was a big thing back there. There were a lot of grade one bands. I think we played in a qualifier of 11 or 12 bands. There were two pools, so there was like 20 odd bands or whatever there was, 21, 22 bands. So just to qualify for the final was a big deal back then. So we did that in 2003, and that was on the back of a really hell of an experience in Lorient. So we played at the Interceltic Festival in Lorient, and there was a searing heat wave through France, and people were dying, and it was just we were playing in 40-degree heat. It was just unbelievable playing conditions. Then we arrived in Scotland. We had a band full of really good young players, and we'd learnt from those two previous trips we talked about, and so we had this influx of young players. We had a lot of really new, exciting music. We were experimenting with stuff. I was certainly experimenting with things as a pipe major. My brother was probably, at or close to his peak as the drum sergeant as well. He had a really good core going, and so we kind of landed in Scotland, and we were playing at 100 miles an hour, and we had people going, "Who are these guys?" Well, because the band was really humming. We weren't big, but we played the first weekend at North Berwick. We were a bit flat in pitch, so sound we know we needed to fix. So we fixed that pretty much overnight. I remember repitching the whole pipe core straight after mass bands at North Berwick, and we came out the next day at Perth, and people were like, what happened there? It was like a completely different sounding band. And then we got it better and better as the week went on. And so when we hit the Worlds, we were humming, and so we made the final, and um, yeah, we played our calling medley, which I penned the first tune, and then we had for me is probably one of our standout Manawatu medleys from over the years, and it really made a big impact. So I think that was probably the most memorable trip, and I think we ended up 12th overall, 12th or 13th actually. I think it was 13th out of the 14 band final.
Wow.
We didn't get much of a listen. We didn't get much of a listen. We certainly had a lot of favourable comments. Perhaps weren't reflected in the score sheets, but hey, that's fine. We'd landed,
Right. Right.
and then based on that trip, it sort of set the scene for what were very successful trips in 2005, and probably our best trip performance and result wise was 2007
Do you
when we
feel like it
started
was
to get
building up?
consistent.
Like every trip was like,
Yeah, yeah,
could you feel, did you feel on during the week? Because a lot of, overseas band, they practice a lot during that week, right? It's almost like every day and there's a big improvement. But do you feel like the improvement was because of those week, or was it because you do the worlds, you compete, you have a pretty good result, like you just mentioned in '03, and then you go back home and everyone's listened to you're on a high, so you just keep the momentum going. Like
yeah.
how can you describe that sort of like always pushing and pushing to '07, which is your favorite year?
Yeah, look, exactly what you've said there, momentum. You get a taste for it. You've performed against a benchmark, and I guess we came to the realization actually we can compete. Okay, we need to get a bit bigger. There's still improvements we need to make, etc., etc. But we were competitive, and I think that was really something which was really heartwarming to know that you can go to Scotland and be competitive, and that other bands and other players enjoy and respect your music. And look, at the end of the day, that's just as important as results. If your peers in the pipe band world enjoy your music, and um, you know that's worth just as much as results in many ways. So yeah, we kept the momentum going. We collected a few new players. We've always, like a lot of overseas bands, you're never going to get your full team from home. You're always going to need players to come in, guest players, and so we've used a lot of guest players over the years. When I lived in London, we had a whole pod of players based in the UK. But yeah, so moving into '05, we played really well. We weren't big, but it was our first top 10 result in grade one, which we were really proud of. So yeah, we had some top six placings in piping, and yeah, again we made it through the qualifier. I think we won the qualifier that year actually,
Oh.
and then it set the scene for 2007, which was like it was raining. It was just the wettest world's week, just unrelenting. And we had the Ross canister bag system in our pipes, and it gave us an advantage, I think, over some of the other bands that were on sheepskins and didn't quite have the same level of moisture control. But we had a very good band that year, 2007. I think we hit top six piping, two events, and I think we ended up eighth in the medley and ninth overall. And it was a really, yeah, it felt like the culmination of all those years of effort and work and player development
Yeah.
and getting smarter about how we prepare for Scotland, having done it a few times. And it felt like we'd broken in. So that was a very, very satisfying trip. It was a bit bittersweet, I have to say, because my father, who was the bass drummer right up to that time, passed away that year. So we had another very good friend came in, Grant Fitzgerald, to play bass. But that was quite a bittersweet time in the band that we, something big personal in your life happens. And Dad was very much, the heartbeat of the band as well.
Right. Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
so that was quite
I
memorable in that respect as well. So it felt very satisfying to go out and do it for Dad.
Yeah, and have that result too, which is epic. I mean, I know how hard it is for an overseas band to change the mind of people that listen to all the bands, 6 times a year at majors, and you really have to come in strong to get that sort of result. So it means that you guys were yeah, spot on. How do you, like, I'm always curious to hear from Pipe Major too, like because the Worlds is in the summer for Europe, but it's in the winter for you guys. And
Mm.
everyone talks about, if you think about a season, summer is competition and winter is where the hard work should happen. But it's hard to keep players motivated, players to come to practices, and it must be an insanely busy year for a band that competes at the Worlds, because you have to be the best in the summer and the best in the winter if you want to compete at the New Zealand Championship and then the World Championship. How do you How do you maneuver that?
Yeah, that's a big question, and it's a very, very relevant one right now. And I guess the first thing I'd say is there's a reason why we haven't tried to do a world's trip every year, because it's just not sustainable in the long term. I don't believe, for a band that's essentially self-funding like ourselves. Yeah, we get some great sponsorship and support, but it doesn't. It's a hugely expensive exercise going to the worlds, and if just logistically, just in terms of, I mean, if I look at my spreadsheet at the moment, there's about 50 tasks on there, and very few of them are actually related to playing. The whole logistics of getting a big band to Scotland is enormous. So it's a huge effort. So in that respect, every second year, well, it's been 5 years in this respect, this time period, is just a bit more sustainable. From a performance perspective, uh, yeah, it's a lot to maintain, but I think I now feel that with our New Zealand summer season finishing about March, it's actually really great timing for the Worlds, because you've got all those miles on the clock. You've essentially got most of your music sorted. Uh, the hands are going well, the fingers are going well, the pipes are going well. Okay, yes, you have a break, but I found it doesn't take too much to pick that up again. You don't lose all of that work. So actually, it's um, it's a case of managing the workload. And just right now, we're starting to ramp up the intensity. In fact, it's only going to be the next 2 or 3 weeks, really, just before we leave, that we're really going to start ramping it up again. Because overall, the guys are going well. They've maintained the playing standard. It is hard in the middle of winter. We have very damp winters here. So in terms of pipes, yeah, it's not ideal. But yeah, I think in terms of a performance curve, if you like, we don't have too much of a dip, and then we just sort
Okay.
of ramp up the intensity now. But we will need a good break when we get home, that's for sure.
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, I enjoy, that kind of stuff. Even when you think about sports and performance, you know, I watch a lot of football, soccer, and time off. It really, you see players are at their peak. A couple of months into the season, and so you guys hit peak in March for the New Zealand Championship, and then the Worlds in August, and it's not a lot of month after, but it might be enough to kind of like lose a little bit of momentum. And it's a tricky time, and I was just, yeah, super curious to hear if it was something that was hard to manage as a pipe major, pipe surgeon, leading drummer, or if because the recording now starts to hit on YouTube, people get excited about what's happening in Scotland, and it helps kind of like keep that drive for 4 or 5 months, right?
Yeah, no, no, you're bang on. I mean, I think once you start seeing those videos being posted from the majors, etc., that is very motivating, very, very motivating, and it's great to hear what the band's doing. I think another key part of our preparation is new music. We've issued a whole new medley, along with the four-parted MSR, which all the Grade One bands need to play. So I think that's very important too, that you have a focus on new music. I think as musicians, one of our greatest joys should be learning new tunes, and not just playing the same old music. So we made quite a conscious decision to we issued a new medley in January, but really didn't do any work on it at all until after our New Zealand Championships in March. Then we've made that a real focus, and I think that's quite motivating and drives people to practice and enjoy playing when you've got new music to get into. So that's a key part of our build up as well.
That's a good point. So you're saying that the medley that you played at the New Zealand Championship isn't necessarily going to be the one. Well, there are two medleys that you'll have to play at the Worlds, but one of them will be brand new from right now, right? Sort of. So that's your trick to keep
Hmm.
people, like, that appetite to keep going, right? Got it. Nice. That's a good trick.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Look, I mean, there's a real temptation to go with tried and tested music, but actually to keep things interesting. I mean, I've always felt the band, one of our strengths has been that we play fresh music. We don't copy what other bands have played, and it might be the odd tune here and there, but not intentionally. So if I look at our opening tunes and our closing tunes to both of our medleys, I don't think any of them have been played before by grade one bands. So, and that's something we do, that's something personally I really think is important for a grade one band to have a really unique musical identity and have your own tunes, have your own style. Obviously, you don't want it to be too style wise. You don't want it to be too different from the top bands, but I think that musical identity for me, and part of that is playing new music and not being afraid to do that. There's a fear that comes with, oh, what if they don't like it? Well, make sure you get it. Make sure the tunes are catchy. Make sure the medley flows well. Make sure it's fresh. And I think typically you'll be rewarded for that. And as I say, from a musician perspective, from a player's perspective, it makes it more enjoyable when you have new tunes. And I look at the young guys in the band that are experimenting with harmonies at the moment, and it's just brilliant. We've got two or three really good young harmony writers, and they're writing some really good stuff. And part of that is they've had the opportunity through new tunes, and I've given them a bit of license to go a bit wild with a few things. I might have to rein them in a little bit, but overall they're doing a great job. But that sort of creativity, that sort of enthusiasm, if you like, that comes with new tunes, with playing a new medley, I just think is so important and is a big part of keeping people motivated.
Yeah, I love to hear that. I love to hear that, and I hope it's the kind of like conversation I want to have and share with more people, because you hear from a pipe major of a great one band, very solid, that is sharing that kind of stuff. So it's yeah, it's fantastic. What talking deeper into music, like what's how does it look like? What's the tune selection? You're saying that, and your band is known to put some really exciting medleys together. And it looks like it's something that you have at heart. Like you want to, play music that no other bands played. What's the process? You sit down on the in September, I guess not September to September, but you sit down in the beginning of the season and you start pulling things together, or what's the process? I'm curious.
Well, it's a really ongoing incremental process, I think, in terms of new music. I mean, I get ideas in my head about a tune or something I've heard or a tune I might be working on. Um, I tend to be quite glacial with my tune composition. It takes me a year or two to write a new tune, but typically I have a tune like a new opening tune in mind or a major rearrangement of an old reel. It's not something I sit down and do consciously, but I certainly collect ideas and I collect tunes and I will gradually put together a medley. I mean, having a deadline like, oh, geez, we're going to the Worlds next year, we're going to need a second medley. That's a really good motivator to get new tunes out, and so that will prompt me. But yeah, I just collect ideas, I collect tunes, I collect tunes from the other guys. I mean, I'm always looking for tunes from the guys within the band, from other sources. I mean, there's heaps of really high quality composition going on out there at the moment. I look at some of the big names in Scotland, guys like John Dew. I mean, what they're tuning out, some fantastic stuff. But it's I guess having quite a clear idea in your mind in terms of the structure of the medley that you're going to be putting together, the types of transitions you want to do. Um, I was very interested from all of the grade one, well, a lot of the grade one performances at the Worlds last year. The amount of waltzes that were being played. Now, I've always loved playing waltzes. We've played waltzes in our medleys for years. So I was really pleased when I heard grade one bands playing waltz time again. It was like the sun is this big post-COVID. Everyone was getting waltzy, great. So I thought, great, we'll put some waltz time into our medley. So we've got quite a neat transition from Strass Bay to reel in waltz time. So it's things like that. So you'll get a bit of you'll get an influence from what the top bands are doing, and then you combine that with your own ideas and you put it together. I would say that I'm a bit more incremental with new medley composition now. Rather than one big whole block of brand new music, we tend to evolve tunes. So our new medley for Scotland this year has three existing tunes from a previous medley. So it just gives you a bit of a foundation. So something that you know has worked, you might rework it a little bit, change the harmony arrangement. Gary, the leading side, might change the score a bit, but you've got that rock, you've got that foundation there, and then you can build tunes around it. So yeah, it's quite incremental in that respect.
It's interesting that you mentioned that you've, trying to keep, not to like replay the same things, but I've heard a few bands that are playing stuff that they've played before. And, most of the people I've talked to said it worked. So, why change it? And it's finding that sweet balance between something that have worked and that the band's played before, and then new music to get interesting, to keep interesting, or keep things interesting for players
Mm,
and listeners. What are you? I always hear people that are mentioning having a nice balance between traditional music and own composition, something that is fresh and new. What's your perspective on that? Do you mindful of that, or you are more like, let's play music that is cool, that I want to play, not that traditional music isn't, but are you mindful of that?
mm. Yeah, to an extent. I mean, we will always have one or two recognizable tunes, but I think rather than the age of the tune or the if it is traditional or not, it's actually the structure, because I think there are a lot of yeah, new compositions that are very traditional in structure. And if you look at things like Strathspeys in particular, little reels, even we're playing a quite a modern 2/4 march into our medley, um, our new medley this year, but it's actually very traditional in structure. So um, I think, yeah, whether it's an old tune or not, it's not perhaps the most important element. You've certainly got to have some traditional structure in there, I think, in terms of yeah, the format of your tunes. So I think that's finding a balance, as you say, is important. But overall, I think we're not that different to other musical idioms. I mean, you've got to play new material. Otherwise people will get bored. If we all just played greatest hits all the time, players would get bored, listeners would get bored. So I think we've got to keep challenging ourselves with playing new music. It's so important. And look, I personally, on that note, as a bit of an aside, I think it's really timely that we start looking at a different performance structure for, or maybe a different event. I mean, I was so impressed, and when I went to Lorient and heard the big bagads playing in their concert formations, what a fantastic contest! That really is, from an ensemble, from an entertainment perspective. So I really would love to see you know a an alternative event, a new event that can perhaps sit independently from the world's pipe band concert championships or something, where bands can have 15 minutes and they can experiment and they can start and stop and bring in other instruments. I mean, I think that would be a great evolution. And I think it would be hard to organise logistically, of course, but I just think that would be such an exciting development.
That's great. That's great to hear. And sometimes I'm not saying that you know leaders of a band are careful, but you have you represent a band, you represent people, and you there's a competition in place. But it's also great to hear that people are thinking about that formation aspect and the presentation aspect of things, which obviously I'm from Brittany, so I was born and bred and grew up playing that kind of like music. So I'm a big believer in this sort of formation, but I also appreciate the sort of circle aspect and the presentation you have in Scotland, because it's fresh and new to me. But I think there's a competition in Chicago which happened a couple of weeks ago here, and they have one of their medley competition to be a half circle, like a moon, sort of like a and it's great to see. It might take years, but it's great to see events trying to think outside of the box. Um,
Mm, yeah. Great.
Going back into the band and writing the medley. Are you, when you put things together, I imagine you are in conversation with the lead and drummer. Do you think as a whole, as a piece, and you already think about, you said, your brother being a drummer, your dad being also a drummer, and do you have that in you? Is it something that you're mindful of, or do you leave total sort of, not freedom per se, but you let the drummers do their thing? What's your approach?
Oh, look, so important. It's so important that tunes lend themselves to really high quality rhythmic accompaniment. And I mean, I think, yeah, growing up in a household of drummers, in fact, I wanted to learn the drums, but my brother was already playing them, and my dad forced me onto the chanter. So I did actually try to be a drummer when I was very, very young. Um, and I've always played for drummers. It's one thing actually I really enjoy doing. So my brother, obviously, and then pretty much every year I will play for drummers at contests. I really enjoy playing for drummers. The rhythmic element, the foundation for ensemble that it gives, playing with a solo drummer, and as a result, I do put a lot of thought into when I'm selecting tunes or arranging tunes. It's with a really strong weighting towards rhythmic accompaniment. It's got to work, and if it doesn't work, then you can't do it. It's selecting tunes with a strong ensemble feel in mind. So um, Gary Potter, the lead side of the band, and he's fantastic to work with. He tends, he'll give me very honest feedback on tunes, and he will also present options in terms of how tunes could be scored. He'll always seek my opinion on what I think of them, and I'll often come back with fairly minor feedback, or there might be some bits where I say, look, I don't think this is really this particular phrase or bar. It's normally only small bits and pieces is working, and he'll go back and work on that. Obviously, it's only my opinion, but look, it's a really strong criterion in terms of tune selection and medley structure is knowing that it's going to work ensemble, and it's going to be tunes that you can write effective drum scores to.
Great. That's great to hear from a drumming point of view. To feel like you're being listened as well, and taken into consideration, I would say. So
Yeah. Oh,
moving
look,
on to.
Glenn, I love drumming. I love drumming. I've always been a massive fan of pipe band cores. They're just, I mean, a good drum corps brings me as much pleasure as a pipe corps, to be honest. If it's all
That's
going well.
awesome. That's awesome. I mean, I've always said I play the drum because my dad and brother played the drum, and I was born in it. But deep down, I just wish I could play the pipes. Really, that's why I'm talking to all these pipers. Just curious to hear from pipers. Um, you did mention that you in like the sort of the messages that we had, that you played in Scotland, you played with Bochum and Bathgate, and you also lived in London. Was it something that was what was the story behind the move? Was it because of work, or was it because of pipe band? And then joining the band, was it at roughly at the same time?
Yeah, well, there's always a bit more to the story, isn't there? So I met a woman when I was in Scotland in 2003. So it's another reason why it was a fairly memorable trip. And I decided to move to Scotland to be with her in 2004. And I'd also formed a bit of a bond with a few guys in the Boghall and Bathgate pipe band. And so as a result of that, yeah, I moved to Scotland in 2004, and I played with Boghall for the season under Ross Walker, which was just a brilliant experience. I mean, the band didn't have its best competitive season. It was a bit of a transition time for the band, but gee, it was a heck of an experience, and I learned a lot from that. We also did a trip to Russia. Um, we played at this festival in Lipetsk. Um, so we did a week in Russia, which was a hell of an experience. Back then, of course, you wouldn't go near the place now, but so that was a really educational, fun, and a really again, a really formative experience. Um, Playing with Bolkall, and I really enjoy it. And I still have a very strong connection with Bolkall to this day. We've had members of Bolkall, including the current pipe major Ross Harvey. He's played it. He's played in the band. He's come out and played with Manawatu. Johnny Simpson, another of their key players, he's come out and played with us. So we've got a really strong bond with Bolkall that comes from that time. And obviously, as an organisation, they have been just a world leader in their player development and teaching, and I like the way it's a very grounded band. That they come from quite humble beginnings, and I just really like the way that they have built themselves up, and in a very just through hard work. And it's great to see them doing so well. And I have high hopes for Volkel at the Worlds this year. Um, so yeah, so there's a strong connection there. And then the second part of your question, the time in London, yeah, that was only supposed to be a year or two, and that through career and work opportunities and lifestyle, that turned into 6. So, and that was
Wow.
from a pipe band perspective. Um, I was still running the band in New Zealand, would you believe? So I had very good support back here. Stuart Easton was pipe sergeant, did a great job. I was coming back to New Zealand 2 or 3 times a year for contests.
Whoa.
Yeah, I was working as a contractor in London, contract planner for different London boroughs, and I could take time off. And yeah, I clocked up a lot of air miles, and ended up with a pod of players in London, a Manawatu pod of about, I think we got up to 12 players at one point. So we had a really strong Manawatu UK pod based in London. So it was
That's awesome.
really, uh, yeah, it was a really new sort of paradigm in terms of how you can put a grade one band together. And I know other bands have done that as well. But yeah, we had up to a dozen players. That was around 2007, 2009, based in the UK. And that also coincided with, arguably our most successful Worlds trip in 2007. So I think it showed it could be done, that you could put together pipe bands in a different way. You could have a home base, you could have satellite pods working, and provided everyone was working on the right things and putting the work in, you could actually bring them together and quite quickly achieve a pretty high grade one level. So it was really interesting from a pipe band competing perspective, that we could have that success with Manawatu and yet be spread all across the globe. So that
Wow.
was that was certainly quite an experience.
Yeah, I imagine. I imagine two things. You did mention the trip to Russia, and I think one of your opener, which I imagine you wrote, is "Road to Leipzig." I think is the name,
Yeah, Road
or
to
at least the name of
Lipetsk.
the album.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and it's a
Yeah,
cracking tune. By the way, I've always enjoyed to listening to it. Um, and yeah, I had, you could have done the easy route, which is play for a band in Scotland and being based in London. But you chose to stay, and work with the Manawatu band and bring that pod together. And could be another hour long sort of conversation around it, because I've seen bands, trying this. FM is known to do this with a core group in Glasgow, and then the rest locally, and all the bands have
mm,
tried it and it didn't quite work. So I'm again very curious to talk more about that topic, because it's yeah, it's very interesting. But I want to be mindful of your time. I know we're almost an hour in, but if you if you have one thing that you do outside of pipe band and work, like a hobby that you have that you feel like people might not know about, and kind of represent your personality, what could that be?
oh, look, I'm a bit of an outdoors freak. I just love getting outdoors, whether it's on a mountain bike. New Zealand's very mountainous, so it's fantastic for mountain biking. So I'm well into that. I also love trail running and marathon running. So I recently just did the Wellington Marathon. So I really enjoy running in the hills in particular. And where I live here in Wellington, I've got some pretty big hills just on my doorstep here. So I love getting up into them. I do a lot of cycling. I'm a bit of a sports freak as well, I have to say. So being a Kiwi, I'm into my rugby. I follow the All Blacks. Follow the local team here, the Hurricanes. I also coach my son's soccer team. I don't know much about soccer or football, I should say. Sorry, not soccer. I coach my son's football team. I'm coaching his basketball team as well, and his cricket team. So we're big on cricket here as well.
Whoa,
So yeah, look, I love my sports. I love my outdoors, and I think it's partly the team culture as well, which is a pipe band thing as well. I really enjoy seeing a young bunch of kids, learning how to play sport, learning how to bowl or bat properly in cricket, and so that's a big part of my life as well. And yeah, as I say, I've developed this sort of penchant for marathon running. It's a bit masochistic, I know, but I really enjoy the challenge. It's a deeply personal kind of thing as opposed to pipe bands and teams, which are all about the collective input. But yeah, so I'm enjoying the marathon running, and I think that's something I'll just keep doing. So I mean, one, it's very good for you too. So if
that's
it's
impressive,
good
though.
for your health.
Yeah, congrats on the one that you did recently. That's pretty. That's quite an
Thank you.
achievement to run it. What's next for you? So right now you're saying that like in the next few weeks you're gonna be like sort of like getting the level a little higher with the guys. I hope if they're listening to this, they're probably like, oh boy, we're in for a treat for the next couple of weeks with the pipe major. But the trip to Scotland, you're going to do North Berwick, I imagine, like similar to what you usually do. What else is on the pipeline?
Yeah, so we've got well, I tell you what, withdraw coming out yesterday. I mean,
Mhm.
that's really motivating. When you see the actual draw for the World Championships out, it's like, wow, there we are. And yeah, it's a bit of a statistical anomaly too. I see we've drawn fourth on in both the Friday and Saturday, so that's cool. It's fourth on in both. That makes it consistent. So that's had a really motivating impact on us in terms of the next few weeks. Here, we're going to really start ramping things up. We don't have any concerts here or major performances. We've made a conscious decision just to keep focused on work on the new music and just rather than performance, just really detailed workshopping of technique and just getting ourselves as good as we possibly can as individuals, so that when we come together in Scotland and we have that first week in Glasgow, we can put it all together. So yeah, so less of a focus on just getting the band performing to a high level here, more an individual focus. Get to Scotland, put it together. Then yes, we're going to North Berwick. Then if the weather's good, we'll also head up the road to Perth. And I'm really pleased that both contests have both MSR and medley events. So that's great. Hopefully we can get all of our world's material on the board, get it into the circle. And then look, I'm really excited for the worlds. And one of the reasons I'm really excited is that it's the first time that the band Manawatu will have performed at the worlds with the current format of everyone playing four times. So we've only ever been to the worlds when it's been a qualifier and then a final.
All right.
So I'm really looking forward to that. Playing without fear. Playing without the fear of not qualifying, which it's both motivating but it's also quite a negative mindset that people can get into, and you've got to really work hard to get past that. So I'm just really looking forward to playing at the worlds where there's no qualifier. That when you're playing on the Friday in the first event, the MSR, that's going to count towards the World Championships. So it's just you can play free of fear, and it's a very, I think, quite a motivating um, factor actually in terms of this year's World. So because that's only been quite a recent development. I know last time we were there in 2018, it was certainly much a qualifier and final format. So it's great to see that um, it's not the case this time.
You touched a great point. That is so true. And again, I'm glad we're chatting because I've already thought, oh, you imagine you're coming from Australia, New Zealand, and you play at 9 a.m. on a Saturday in the rain, and you don't qualify. It's horrible, right? And so but now you have that factor where, like you said, no fear. but you would never think about
Mm,
it if you're based in, in Scotland, or you just, compete like it's not another major, but it's the main major, but
mm.
you're going through it. But for you guys, it's so true, and I'm excited to, if we can catch up afterwards, to hear how was it different compared to any other years because of that factor. If you guys played more relaxed and better, I'm sure it will. But yeah, it's such a great point
Mm.
on that. So I'm glad you're sharing that.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's a really, really good change that's been made. And I know it comes down to the number of bands. And so I think the magic number is 17. If there's more than 17 bands, there'll be a qualifier. If there's less, and it just so happens that this year there's 16. And I think last year there was 15. But look, talking to a lot of players, they much prefer the format where everyone plays four times, and the World Championship is determined based on performances, results over those four events. So it would be fantastic if that format could be cemented in place. And look, if the numbers of Grade One bands get high, I guess that will just have to be worked through. But I think it drives better performance. I think moving away from a qualifier finals format has got to be a good thing musically. And look, as you say, when you come from New Zealand, it's a lot of the success of a trip, especially um, we're not vying for the world championship. We just want to perform well. And if we perform well, I know we can get a pretty good result. But yeah, that not having to qualify is just a really positively motivating factor.
That is awesome to hear. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, thank you so much for chatting. Overall, I thought it was great just to hear how you prep the band, how you're thinking and approaching medleys, and just your story as well. It was very inspiring. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure to chat, Glaren. Great questions, and yeah, I look forward to catching up with you in Scotland.
Yeah, yeah. Likewise, likewise, and good luck for the preparation. And then yeah, enjoy your day. I know it's early morning for you, so enjoy the rest of your day.